Good afternoon. I said hello to this side of the room. I'll say goodbye to that side of the room, so I do it fairly. But welcome, everybody. It's good to see you. I'm going to do a different thing to start. I just came from, we have this program called STEM Scholars, STEAM Scholars. We changed the name. Science, Technology, Engineering, Arts, and Math. And we invite students to apply. This year I have 20 students from a number of schools from around the district. And our visit today was to Ravinia. And it's amazing the behind-the-scenes science and technology that goes into making a concert. If you've ever been to Ravinia, they have now everything's fiber optics, it's connected, they can control the sound and volume of different speakers. That was all extraordinary. But the students failed a test, so I'm going to give you the test and see how we do. Raise your hand if you listen to the Beatles. Okay, my faith in humanity is restored. Not a single hand went up. It was like, it was remarkable. But I still think the Beatles are good. And if you have a chance to go to Ravinia this summer, they've created this new thing called the Music Box, which is a Disney-like experience. That the presentation is called Bernstein's Answer. And it's what is music, what makes music special, and it uses Leonard Bernstein, but it's incredible technology and the screens and dynamics. And Bobby McFerrin, who I'm a fan of both Bernstein and McFerrin, is the host, and I highly recommend it. But then they have an exhibit of the Beatles. And so these kids at least now know who the Beatles are. They may not know their music, but they know who they are. Anyway, thank you for being here. Let me start by thanking the Village of Wheeling for hosting us. And we've got a number of people here that I want to just acknowledge. Cook County Commissioner Scott Britton is with us. We're graced with 3 trustees. Trustee Mary Papantos, Jim Rafato, and Ray Lang. We've got Sue Stein, the board president of the Wheeling Park District, is here. And have I missed any other electeds before I go to a couple other special guests? From the Wheeling Fire Department, Steve Josic, Fire Chief, and then 2 officers from Wheeling Police Department. And I'll speak to both sides. First, for the electeds. Running for office is always hard, but serving in office is even harder, especially serving in service of our community, delivering the services each and every day, making sure it gets done. Thank you guys for what you do. We really appreciate it. And to the first responders, the fire and the police, for what you do looking out after us day in and day out, and then especially at times like these, I appreciate you being here. It's really good to be here in person. I'm going to step away from here in a second, but I'll stand here for my opening remarks. It's good to be here in person, to see everybody, to hopefully be making progress to put the pandemic behind us. And we know it's not behind us. We know that COVID is still going around. I was supposed to have a meeting tomorrow with a friend who wrote me today. He just had a baby 3 weeks ago. His 4-year-old son tested positive 1 week ago, and he tested positive yesterday. So we know it's still there. But we also know that because of the vaccines, if you're vaccinated, if you're boosted, while the rate of COVID incidence may be relatively high right now, the people in the hospital is as low as it's been throughout the pandemic. And that's the progress. And that's a testament to a number of things. I'll start with the scientists and researchers and hard workers who brought forth these vaccines in extraordinary time. It wasn't overnight. The research behind it, the mRNA research, for example, behind the Moderna and Pfizer vaccine is 20 plus years. And I see the Northwestern shirt, yay Northwestern. But this was research done at our universities, done globally. BioNTech is a German company. But we used that technology to tackle a very difficult problem. And I'm very proud that I had a meeting this past week with someone from J&J as well. But J&J, Moderna, Pfizer are American companies, American innovation. And that is, as much as anything, a testament to who we are as a country, but the investment we make in our young people. We need to continue to make that investment. But it's also the American Rescue Plan. It's hard to believe it's been 2 years, but if I go back 2 years ago when we were in the early stages of this pandemic, we didn't know what was happening. The first bill we passed was a supplemental appropriations bill in March of 2020, $7 billion. Seems so quaint now, it's a small number. It's a lot of money. We then came back a couple weeks later and passed the CARES Act and then CARES 2, and then last year passed the American Rescue Plan. And we have invested trillions of dollars into our economy, into our communities, making sure that people could get the vaccines. It's one thing to develop the vaccines, but you gotta get them in people's arms. You gotta get it out to the community. And if you had any chances to go to some of the mass vaccination sites, I was at one in Des Plaines where they took an old Kmart and converted that, and people were walking through. I think the most interesting is not the right word, but the Lake County Fairgrounds was a drive-in vaccine site, almost like Indy racing car. They had cars line up on both sides of the building, 5 rows each side of the building. They would send in 8 rows each side of the building. They'd send in 5 cars. Whatever it was, 40 cars came in at a time, and on a signal was turn off your engines. And suddenly the pit crews came out. In this case, it was the people with the iPads taking down your information, and then a nurse walking down each row giving out 5 shots. Each row, once everyone got their shot, there was a signal, start your engines, and they all left. And it was wonderful at the time. If you remember how hard it was to get the vaccine, people would be honking their horns and cheering that they got their vaccine. Today, we were talking before, I had COVID 3 months ago. I was diagnosed February 1st, or tested positive February 1st. So 3 months is tomorrow. I'm going to get my next booster. I don't have to think about where I'm going. I'll figure out where I am and go to the nearest pharmacy and get the booster. And that's in part because of the American Rescue Plan. But I also invested in our schools. It kept our schools open. I talked about these kids I was with today. Still not normal. I don't want to say everything is fine, and I know we have a couple of teachers here. They will testify that it's far from fine. These kids have been, if you think my dad was born in 1933, truly a Depression baby. That defined his life. He's still alive, but he is a Depression baby. These are going to be COVID babies. Their life will be defined about what we've experienced here. But at least we got the resources in to try to keep the schools open, did a better job, and we'll do a better job next year. And it kept the economy running. We last year had 5.7% GDP growth. That's wonderful. Unemployment over the past year dropped from 6.4 to 3.6, the biggest one-year drop ever experienced by our country. Well, I've only had one meeting today, so I've only heard once today that we're having a real hard time finding employees. Ravinia was telling you how hard it is there. Everywhere you go, they're looking for employees. We know we have a worker shortage, which gets me to my next point. As strong as some of the indicators of the economy are, we're facing real inflation, both structural inflation and the effects of the pandemic, and we have to address it. You just look at the price of gas. I filled up. I didn't have my credit card. I left my wallet at home. I shouldn't tell the police this. I only had $30 in my pocket. I bought $30 of gas. $30 of gas should be a full tank. It was less than half a tank. So we understand how challenging it is. It's not just gas, it's the price of food and the dislocations. I say we had this finely balanced supply chain that had been engineered over my entire career. I was an industrial engineer coming out of school, and we were talking about just-in-time manufacturing and Kanban and all the things. So we had this delicately balanced supply chain that was already under stress before the pandemic. Pandemic shut everything down, and when it opened up, it was completely misaligned. But it's proving harder to get aligned than anyone anticipated. And China, who has this zero-tolerance policy, shut down Shanghai. Beijing may shut down next. Their policy means the goods that we rely on aren't coming in that the world needs, which leads to what actions do we take to try to help our economy? we need to make sure we are manufacturing things here in the United States, nothing more so than microchips. Anyone buy a car over the last year? Car's a computer on wheels now. There are chips in that car that control your steering, control your lights, but also measure your gas output, keeping track of every single statistic, as well as your brakes and you know, what used to be just step on a pedal and there was energy transferred to press the brakes to stop the car is now a computer. We invented the microchip here in this country. We used to lead the world in manufacturing microchips. Today, we manufacture less than 12% of the global supply of chips, and we manufacture exactly 0% of the most sophisticated chips. We need to bring that back, and what we're working on in Congress, and the House has passed something called the Competes Act. That's an acronym, I don't remember what it stands for. The Senate has passed their version called USICA. That I do know is U.S. Innovation and Competition Act. We're now in conference and trying to reconcile those. We need to get that to the desk of the president and signed, because Intel already announced they were investing $20 billion in a new chip plant in Ohio, creating hundreds, if not thousands, of jobs. But they said they need to have a competitive level playing field. And the Competes USICA bill would provide them that. And Intel, just one company, has said they'll invest $100 billion in that facility over the next decade if we can get the legislation that levels the playing field and creates the incentives that they need to do that. Well, that's just one place in Ohio. It's the same is true here. Our area is becoming a leader on electric vehicle charging stations. We have a company called EV Box. We have a couple of others. Illinois has Rivian manufacturing cars. Ford, GM have said they're converting everything to electric vehicles. And if you think you had a lot of chips before, the electric vehicles have even more chips. We have to do that. And that's just one example. We have to figure out the supply chain challenge, because that's one of the ways we bring down the core inflation, and it's something that I'm committed to doing. I actually introduced legislation 2 years ago about Office of Supply Chain Resiliency. That's included a variation of that in the Competes Act, so I'm pleased with that. But those are some of the challenges, and I've been going on long. Let me just wrap up and talk a little bit about the world. No, don't have any better news there. We're all watching what's happening in Ukraine. Heart's breaking. Saw a piece on the news this morning, interview a 16-year-old girl who had been raped by the Russians. There's no question that this attack by Russia was unprovoked. It's Putin's war. And there's no question that war crimes are being committed. We had a hearing in the Foreign Affairs Committee that I'm on a week after the war started, back in February, early March, saying we need to start collecting that evidence. But I'll take it a step farther. In my mind, there's no question that acts of genocide are being committed by Russia. And Canada has already declared it a genocide. I'm not an expert in this, so I'm going to be careful how I describe it. But clearly we're seeing acts of genocide, unlike anything we've seen since the last century. So all things that are concerning. I give credit to the administration for not anticipating this war, but understanding the importance of the alliances, of strengthening NATO. Putin wanted to divide and split NATO. This is united NATO. It's united the international community. It's united Europe as a whole. Sweden and Finland now want to join NATO. President Biden said he would enthusiastically support that. I would as well. And I was pleased, one of the greatest powers we have as a country vis-a-vis China or Russia or any other power is our ability to convene our allies, to bring other nations together to get things done. And President Biden hosted more than 40 countries last week in Europe to talk about how do we respond to this. The stakes couldn't be higher. We are literally fighting for democracy and the future of democracy across the world. And if Ukraine can defeat Russia and defeat Vladimir Putin, that will be a huge step for democracy. If Russia were to conquer Ukraine and China were to watch that, and Iran and other bad actors, the challenges to us are going to be far, far greater. So I am grateful for the unity of the world. I had a chance the week before, I guess it was on Tuesday, it wasn't the week before last, it was this week, to meet with the mayor of Warsaw. Warsaw is taking in 2 million, or Poland's taking in 2 million people, mostly women and children, because the men are staying to fight. They're worried about how do they educate these children, how to make sure that this isn't a lost generation, and the world with the United States as a part of it, has a role to play here. So I'll close with this thought. I have a friend who is an immigrant from what was the former Soviet Union, and he sends a periodic email. He started businesses since he's been here. He's got an operation in Ukraine, software development. Actually, I think it's cybersecurity. And a couple weeks ago, he sent out an email just saying, I want to let everyone know, we check in with our team daily, everybody's safe. Most people have moved to the west of Ukraine or further west to Poland or one as far as Portugal. Everyone continues to work because they know they have to. And he showed a picture of one of his employees working for Dimitri. He said, this is Dimitri from the bomb shelter. And I've been keeping that in my heart, thinking about it. As hard as the work I do, as hard the work any of us do, I think about Dimitri and I think about all those people in Ukraine fighting literally for their nation. They've had 30 years of independence, and as their ambassador said, the kids who have grown up in independent Ukraine are not going to give that up, and they're fighting for that, and we'll support them. So with that, kind of a wide-ranging introduction, let me open up to questions and talk what you want to have. I'm sorry, Robert. Robert has the microphone. All right, so you'll do the microphone. I'll take this. Wander.
Yeah, hi, Brad. I saw the president's news conference whereby he was promoting oil companies to actually produce more natural gas and oil and maybe build ports at the Gulf that can convert the gas to natural liquid gas, send to European countries to help wean them off of Russian dependency. I applaud that, but I was talking to my neighbor who's a Democrat, and he was very frustrated with the Democrats. He said, those Democrats, they want to decrease emissions, now they're increasing emissions. He said, they don't know what they want, they're back and forth. I said, but don't you understand? I said, right now, a prudent and responsible administration can do handle more than one problem at a time. I said, the world is in an economic slowdown, possibly recession, and when that happens, the CO2 levels will naturally go down. So this is an opportunity at a time whereby you could actually take some steps that will help reduce the dependency. I said, it's a reasonable thing to do. And he said, you know what? That makes sense. So my comment would be, I think the Democrats need better messaging, much better messaging. And I fear that if someone doesn't tell Jamie Harrison this, it may not get the votes that it needs in the future.
Yep. Well, thank you. So I'm here officially, so I'm going to stay away from partisan, but I will say this. I quote Will Rogers, I don't belong to an organized party, I'm a Democrat. I feel that in my bones. But let me touch on what you said, because that's an opportunity to talk about it. You know, we are a fossil fuel economy. Greg and I were talking on the way over here. We stopped for lunch. I didn't share this part to him, but he was reminding me, 2 years ago at this time, the price of a barrel of oil was below $0, if you remember, in the midst of the pandemic. When I was in college coming out and interviewing for jobs, one of the questions at one of the firms I applied for, they said, what would happen if the price of oil would go to zero? And there was no answer at the time because the price of oil could never go to zero. They just wanted to see how you think. And it was one of those questions that either you would think through different possibilities and do well, or you would completely crumble and say, I don't know. And I remember when the price went to zero, I was like, oh my God, it's a reality. That was the definition of cognitive dissonance. Today, the price is hovering around 100. If I think about the 40 years from those 2 points, when I was asked the question to when I realized there was an answer, the global economy, billions, literally billions of people were lifted from poverty to middle class, and in that was a dependence on energy, and it was a dependence on fossil fuel energy. And so we face a very clear crisis of environmental climate change, driven by a lot of causes. That's fine. Happy to debate those, but I can't debate the fact that we're seeing forest fires. And I grew up in Tornado Alley out in Colorado. Tornadoes would touch down and pop up and touch down. Now you see mile-wide tornadoes land and go hundreds of miles at a time on the ground. That never happened before. We are seeing the effects of climate change, and we have to address it. And the only way to address that is to move away from that fossil fuel economy that has lifted billions of people out of poverty. Not easily done. Yesterday we had a hearing a briefing on foreign affairs talking about this at a global scale. So what does it mean? Well, I can add another thing to it. I came of age in the 70s. We had the Arab oil embargo. Oil has been used as a weapon of diplomacy, if not warfare, going back long before then, it was used in World War II. You can look at the Middle East, Russia, Venezuela. It is a serious geopolitical problem as well as a climate problem. So I can make two arguments for why we want to move away from that. But I don't get to just, pun intended, flip a switch and say, oh, we have a new energy source. We have to transition. The first thing I think, and you're seeing it now with Europe finally saying, okay, we're going to move away from Russian oil, is how do we replace Russian energy sources, oil and gas, with other sources that are less likely to be used as a political tool? And American oil and gas is certainly a part of that equation. And at the same time, and this is your point, walk and chew gum, how do we find ways to replace fossil fuels, which will, as long as we're dependent on them, will be a threat to our climate and a tool of coercion, with renewable and other sources of energy that will free us up from both of those threats. And that's our challenge. And we have to keep doing both. So in the Ways and Means Committee, my other committee, we have the Green Act, which is working on creating tax incentives to promote development of alternative fuels, whether that's wind, or one of the bills that I'm very proud of I introduced is sustainable aviation fuel. We have the ability, using fats and grease and other byproducts, to create aviation fuel that reduce emissions, greenhouse gas emissions of the aviation industry by 50 to 80%. Well, aviation accounts for 2% of our global emissions. If we can get those fuels to scale, we eliminate a full 1% of emissions on that one thing. Okay, there is no silver bullet. I don't get to do one thing, but that's one of the things we're going to do. It passed the House. We're trying to get it through the Senate, and we'll keep doing that. So, thank you.
My point was messaging, because
We got to get the message out.
just as right now, if we decide to go ahead and approve some well liquid natural gas to go to our European countries, it's in our national interest, and it doesn't mean that we can't reach the 2030 goals.
Right.
We could, but the point being, it doesn't have to be one or the other.
We have to do both.
He thought it was one only, and the Democrats did not put messaging, so he thought the Democrats are just vacillating back and forth.
No, thank you. I appreciate it. We absolutely have to do both. So, okay, we'll come over here, Robert, on the next one too. Sorry, go ahead.
Thank you, Senator. Appreciate your staff reaching out to me today, and thank you for being here as well. I had a couple of questions. I'll start with the easy one.
Okay, I apologize. I'm going to limit you to one just so we can get to everybody.
Yeah, exactly. So 48% of the chip foundry is in Taiwan right now. And I'm just kind of curious, what's our stance as far as our relations with Taiwan, and aside from
great question, and I'm going to expand it just because, as I said before, we need to be making those chips here. And I learned a new word yesterday in this conversation we had on global climate action. When I talked about supply chain resiliency, we need to onshore, nearshore, and the stuff that's offshore. So onshore is making things in the U.S., nearshore is having things close by, because you don't want to have total dependency on any one location. And then we're a global economy, so we're always going to be finding sources beyond that. The term yesterday was friendshore, which is we should be working with allies. Taiwan is an ally. Now we have a policy of a one China policy that gets into geopolitics. But well, we've been very clear, both in classified briefings that I can't share, but in conversations with administration officials, that Taiwan is our ally. Taiwan, the relationship with China is fraught. That's what I was saying about Ukraine, is if Russia were to have conquered Ukraine in 2 days without consequence, China would have been watching that, and it would have been very concerning. Taiwan is the single most important supplier of chips and chip processing. The equipment's made in Europe. Some of it's made in the US, but Taiwan is where the fabrication is happening. We can't have single point sourcing for anything. That's one lesson from the pandemic, but we need to make sure that Taiwan remains a critical source and a key ally.
Hello. First, I want to take issue with your statement that you're not going to be partisan because it's a town hall. And I think this goes back to your messaging. You can't do these things unless you win elections. Democrats always do, you're very professorial what we're going to do, and you're always focusing on governing, which is great, but you can't govern if you don't have a majority. You can't have a majority if you don't win. And the whole thing about Democratic, I mean, the Republicans run on emotions. Who knows what boogeyman they're going to pick. It's CRT one thing, it's caravans. And the Democrats, you're giving us a lot of facts. But things that go viral are things where people actually talk about their emotions. And the messaging is just off. No, facts aren't going to do it. Facts aren't going to give you the majority. Facts aren't going to give you a governing majority. The Democrats are being, and I'm a lifelong Democrat, but it's very hard to watch that they get taken advantage, they lose elections all the time. And it's not based on governing, it's not based on facts, and I don't know how to do that.
So I hear you. I'll say it this way. I have 4 jobs. I have my legislative job when I'm in Washington, the policies, those are the briefings and the letters. I have constituent services, and this is going to be my opportunity to introduce my team that is here. We've got Robert Perez, who is leaving me to go be the facilities director at Lombard Park District. Greg Claus is my deputy chief of staff. He runs our office here. We've got Gloria, Patrice, Sarah, Adrian, all the team there. And starting Monday is Ivan, who will be joining us Monday. And we take care, our job is customer service, but us, our customers are constituents.
Right,
Hang on, let me finish. So both of those are full-time jobs. I have a 3rd job, which is campaigning, and my 4th job is family. Not in that order, I would reverse the order. There's a time and a place for everything. When I run as a Democrat, and I campaign as a Democrat, and we have campaign events, and I'm happy to be as partisan as I am comfortable being there. But once I'm elected and when I'm in office, I represent everybody. Democrats, Republicans, if you voted for me, if you didn't vote for me. And it's very important to me personally that I keep those 2 jobs very separate. So as I stand here as the representative, I represent everybody, and I just won't get into partisan.
That's different than the other side. The other side doesn't have those constraints, and they're winning. And if everything is predicted, then then Democrats are going to get creamed in November.
Can I stop that for a second? There are good Democrats and there are good Republicans. I think that you're slamming an entire group of people.
I am.
And so I think we should end this.
Like I said, I'm happy to have the conversation, but I think you're right. And some of my best friends are Democrats, some of my best friends are Republicans, some of my family are both. The fact of the matter is, I say it this way, I play on 3 teams. Team USA, first and foremost, Team Congress, and that is fighting the prerogatives of the legislative branch between the executive and the judiciary. And only then do I get into red-blue. And if I could spend as little time as possible in the red and the blue, and more time on what advances our country, I think that's how that's how good members of both parties win their elections. And so that's what I tried to do. So, going back to Robert.
Hello, Congressman. Thank you for having this event and hearing us. My question relates to something that's a little further down the road, but it's on my mind almost every day, and that is, what are the plans for 2024? We know there can be problems in the midterms, and I agree with many of the comments that were made today that I find the messaging from the party very inconsistent and confusing, which I worry about. But what I don't see happening on the Democratic side right now is positioning a viable candidate for 2024.
So I'm just not going to talk politics. What I will talk about 2024 is we need to make sure we protect our elections. And what does that mean? It's making sure that we're working with states. I passed legislation a couple years ago for the Election Assistance Commission, making sure it's funded so the federal government can help every state have secure elections, so that there are paper trails for all of the ballots, that if and given the politics of the day, I expect we will have many recounts, that the recounts will be, no, we counted top to bottom, we counted bottom to top, we even counted left to right and right to left, and the number came out the same. I want to make sure that we're protecting our election judges. Anyone here an election judge? So, thank you. Election judges wake up well before dawn, show up an hour before the polls open at 6 o'clock, and they are there until after the polls close. There are no shifts, because you can't have a half crew in the morning and a half crew in the afternoon. They are the ones who are they are the grease that keeps our election machine operating. And we need to make sure that we're encouraging more people to do that. I want to make it easier for people to vote. In my view, we should have automatic registration as soon as you turn 18. When I turn 18, it's not hard for the military to know where to find me if they need me. It shouldn't be hard for the government to also turn and say, you have two responsibilities. We all believe we should protect our nation, but we protect our nation not just by military, but more importantly, I would argue, by voting and being a part of our government. So those are the things I think we can do. I'm worried about 2024, no question about it. I want to make sure that everyone in this country who has the right to vote is confident that they can vote safely, that their vote will be counted, and that the tally of the vote will reflect the will of the people. And that's what I'm really focused on.
What does a popular vote for the state legislature is the power they can overturn it?
And so that's the integrity of the vote in the election is something that we are working on, and we have to make sure that's the case.
Hi, Brad.
Robert's picking people, so don't be mad at me, but be mad at him. But more importantly, get his attention.
Yeah, I wanted to thank you again for everything that you're doing for us, especially the work for the Great Lakes. And I wondered if you might expound a little bit on the environmental front for
Sure.
us. Thank you.
So, trying to pick what to talk about, I realized I should have talked about the bipartisan Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. I was proud, I'm part of Problem Solvers, which is 29 Democrats, 29 Republicans. We crafted the initial framework that went to the Senate. Senate passed it 69 to 30, I think, came back to the House. House should have passed it overwhelmingly quickly. It passed, at the end of the day, we only have at that time we had a 4-vote majority among Democrats. 6 Democrats, the squad, I'll call them out, voted against it. So we needed Republicans to vote it. Thankfully, we had 13 Republicans. But part of the dynamic of our politics right now, of the 29 Republicans that started this bill in July of last year, only 7 of them felt comfortable to vote for it in November when it passed. That's a reflection as much as anything on the context of our politics we have right now. Thing is, it passed, it's signed by the president, all good news. As part of that, it's a long way to get to the Great Lakes, President Biden announced a $1 billion investment for restoration of 25 areas of concern for the Great Lakes. And he chose to send his, I'm not sure what his title is, but his special envoy for the infrastructure, Mitch Landrieu, is just his guy on the infrastructure implementation, came to Waukegan, and we celebrated because of the 25 areas of concern. Waukegan, which we've been working on for a long time, is going to be the first that will be removed completely off, hopefully next year. No, 2024. It should be, Susie, 2024?
As soon as we get the beneficial use impairment taken care of, and that's going to be Great Lakes.
Yeah. So
We've done our work.
we've been doing our work, and let me introduce Susie Schreiber, who's been, I talk about, this is the President of the United States coming in at the end saying, look what we've done, how wonderful it is, and it is, but it's 25 years of hard work that has been getting there, and in the Waukegan Harbor CAG. So thanks, Susie, for what you do. But I'm proud to restore, make sure we always have funding for the Great Lakes Restoration Initiative. I'll finish with a funny story. 4 years ago, there was rumors that the budget would dramatically cut the Great Lakes Restoration Initiative, so I was going to the floor to speak to defend it. It's $300 billion. I think we're up to $400 billion a year now. And as I'm sitting talking to my colleague from Michigan, he says, today's Great Lakes Day. I said, I didn't, but I'm going to add it to my speech. My staff watch, when a member goes to the floor, their staff watches. It's kind of like the team's players up to bat. And they all knew what I was supposed to say. They didn't know what I was going to say. And today, National Great Lakes Day, and they panicked thinking I had just created a national holiday that didn't exist. I did not, but I'm glad there's a holiday because the Great Lakes are a great treasure. All right, who's next, Robert?
Hello, and thanks for being here. We had several mandates that were very effective with COVID, and I was wondering if we could think about having a mandate for people to be able to work from home, maybe 3 days a week, or whatever, and mandate that companies should do this so that we would lower the need for gasoline and thereby also the fuel prices.
So I'll give the half of the answer you like, and then the second half you won't like, is I think it's a great idea, but we shouldn't do it by mandate. And the reason I say that is, back to what I was saying before, my 3 teams, I'm going to jealously protect the prerogatives of Congress. That's a legislative question. Whether we have a 5-day workday, 3-day workday, there's a number of things that clearly sit on the responsibilities of Congress. And Congress has been, for the last 50, 70 years, ceding its authorities to the administration because they aren't willing to make the hard choices. I don't know if anyone read George Will this week. He wrote a piece. The title was, we should pass a constitutional amendment banning senators running for president. And so you guys agree. And I looked at that, I said, this can't be real. This has to be The Onion or something. But it really was, and he actually made a cogent case, because what he was saying is senators have reached a point now where they're on social media and rushing to get onto the TV screens rather than making the hard choices legislating. Now, I may appreciate that a little bit too much, because I am incredibly frustrated that the stuff the House sends over to the Senate languishes and dies, and that's everything from immigration to environmental work to trying to invest in our economy and our kids. But it should be a congressional thing. But I think we should definitely be exploring how we work. Now, let me do the flip side, which makes it hard. People are talking about reducing the work week from 40 to 35. We have a worker shortage. And the market drives a lot of this as well. I believe we should raise the minimum wage. I'm going to jump around quite a bit here. I absolutely believe we should raise the minimum wage. It's at $7.25 nationally, which is well below, adjusted for inflation, what I was making when I was in high school. And it's not high school kids working minimum wage today. It's oftentimes their parents working 2 and 3 jobs. No one should work full time and be in poverty. But there aren't a lot of minimum wage jobs right now, because even a dishwasher last summer, we had lunch in Mundelein, Greg and I were talking to the restaurant owner, and she was saying she's paying $18 to $20 an hour for dishwashers. And she can't keep them because they keep going to take jobs at Amazon or other places. In a growing economy, the economy takes care of that. So the legislature, especially the House, is designed to have turnover, to be responsive to the needs of the population, and we should be making the laws. So, long, wandering answer, but an interesting idea. No.
I was actually thinking that if you have people working only 3 days a week, what do you tell teachers? Oh,
No,
that's what I was
working from
like
home.
confused about. I know, but you can't have teachers working from home, you can't have doctors working from home. It's not, I think that, I actually,
Talking about those that can.
yeah, but then how do you make that a law or a mandate?
People back to work that are commuting.
But how do you mandate it, though? Because you say, like, this job gets it, I mean, that would be like one heck of a mandate.
And that's why I'm saying the legislature, which is
Something
close.
Business should be able to.
Right.
Business
We agree.
needs to run itself. The government shouldn't run business, because the government doesn't know everybody's business.
What the government should do, let me take on that,
The
is
government should run the government.
what government should do is work at clearing away obstacles for people to achieve their dreams.
I agree.
And that's true whether they want to be a musician coming from Ravinia, or open a business, or whatever it might be. If we can create ladders of opportunity and remove obstacles from success, then we're doing a good job. And that's kind of more of a philosophical statement. So. Yeah, I know. I hear you. I said
All these people back to work after the pandemic now.
I like the idea. Look, all states selling their offices, because they've done exactly what you've said, and we can do it through incentives to those that can, provide perhaps tax incentives to reduce anything we can do to reduce commuting. And do you know what another way to reduce commuting is? I'm going to turn to our community over here. If you look what's going on over here, there's housing, there's dining, there's entertainment, all within walking distance. To create opportunities for people to live, work, and play without having to get in their car, to have access to mass transit, those are some of the other things we can do. So.
Getting back to domestic content legislation, it's good to hear that you're trying to do this again, but I'm recalling a similar measure back in the 80s for Sematech. I don't know if you were cognizant of that. was a plan to keep domestic memory chip manufacturers, the chips for ROMs and,
Right.
boot up software onshore, and it died somehow. I don't know whether it was legislative or executive branch. I do know that during the first Bush administration, Bill Darman, who was one of his staff, commented, well, we don't care about, protecting computer chips. We're going to be the world leader in potato chip production. He was a former Frito-Lay executive. Is there anything in this legislation that's going to prevent that kind of, did you learn anything from that?
So I think we did. What's in the legislation that we sent to the president, the appropriations bill in March, there were some things attached to that bill as well, a handful of bills that get appended on and they pass as a package, one of which was the CHIPS Act, and very specific for this to address that. And then I talked about competes is more vis-a-vis innovation. So investing in manufacturing, investing in capacity, it's not just the technology, it's the people who create the technology, are going to operate the technology, making sure we have the skilled workforce. It's all of those things. And again, I'm of a mind that incentives work better than constraints, because I can adapt and adjust incentives. I worked with business before going to Congress, and one of the things I would tell clients is if you follow your incentives, you can track the source of the behaviors of your people. People respond to incentives. Sometimes they're cash incentives, sometimes they're psychic incentives, but understanding what motivates people, it has a difference. And that's one of the reasons I wanted to be, and I was excited to go into the Ways and Means Committee, because we're the oldest committee, only one mentioned in the Constitution, but we're responsible for finding the ways and means of getting things done. And incentives can have a big impact. By the way, wrong incentives can have a negative impact, and you always have the rule of unintended consequences, but with incentives you can tweak them and try to smooth out those issues. So, and then after that, we're going to go I promised a question here, and I'm just curious what it is, because I need to say something about the White Sox. It depends whether it's good or bad, I told you.
Climate change again. A carbon tax and dividend back to taxpayers. It's gaining momentum. For example, the UN in their 2022 IPCC climate report recommended such a plan. BP, the petroleum company, supported a price on carbon because, as they said, it's fair, efficient, and effective. And in the Wall Street Journal this past week, the American Petroleum Institute drafted a recommendation for such a plan to Congress. Do you see a carbon tax and dividend passing in this Congress?
I see it possibly passing. Greg, CLL Climate, what's the name of the group that's been promoting this for a while? No, it's Climate something. But that's it, CCL, thank you. It's an interesting idea. My issue, as I've shared with them, has always been the absolute 100% dividend. We know that there are costs from climate costs to the nation as a whole, that we are building resiliency into our infrastructure that has a cost. We're dealing with the consequences and effects of severe storm events, et cetera, that has a cost. So I've always said, my issue is not the dividend. My issue is that the 100% dividend, that some of that money needs to go to cover the cost to us as a society. That bill has fairly broad support within the Democratic Party. I don't know, I'd be surprised right now if there was any Republican sponsorship. But I think if it came to the floor, if we worked to find a bipartisan path, that we could get support for it. The idea of making sure, My dad's a CPA, so I was raised on accounting. I have some accounting background, the idea of matching expenses and revenues. I think this idea of matching, there are things that we are spending for as a society, the direct consequence of the things that we do, driving our cars as example, that we can try to match those. So the Highway Trust Fund is a good example. The gasoline tax goes into a highway trust fund to pay for the highways that we use for the cars using the gasoline. There's challenges with that as we move to electric cars, and suddenly the revenues for repairing the highways is going to go down. We need to figure out ways to do that. So I'm open to all of these ideas, just trying to find a way that will always address our challenges, lift up our economy, and put us on the path we want to go. So.
Can you share your
I
thinking?
promise we'll get to you.
Can you share your thinking about forgiving college debts?
I can. Is that your question too? Okay, so 2 for 1, that's a good day. 3 for 1. Let me first give my thought on how expensive college is to start with and why we're going in so much debt. When my dad, who will be 89 in November, or September, was in college in the 50s, state universities, the formula was roughly tuition covered about a third of the cost, and the state government covered 2/3. And the idea was, let's invest in educating young people, creating doctors and engineers and teachers and philosophers and artists, whatever, because we're going to reap that money back in the growth we have. And I think the evidence showed that that was money well spent. By the time I got to college in the 80s, it was about 50-50, and the kids going today, tuition's covering 2/3 to all of the costs at state schools. Some states are taking steps to address this, like Georgia, Alabama have innovative programs. Illinois has some programs. My view is anyone who wants to go to college should be able to. I also would argue that college isn't necessarily for everybody. I was at a thing at the Electrical Workers Union talking about, as a program talking about training people for installing these electric vehicle chargers. An apprentice on that program works for 5 years, so it's a year longer than a 4-year college, doing my math right. I went to college. They get paid while doing it, and they graduate, and they're making 6 figures. So there's different paths for everybody, and I talked about clearing obstacles. I want to clear obstacles. So anyone who wants to go to university should be able to. I believe that anyone who goes to university ideally should be able to graduate with no debt, but if they do have to take debt, grants, loans, work study while they're in school, and by work study I mean no more than 1 day a week max, that no one should graduate school with more debt than they can fully expect to pay off in the career they choose within 10 years. And it could be shorter than 10 years, but the reason 10 years is you graduate early 20s. By your 30s, you should be able to think about starting a family, buying a house, starting a business, whatever the case may be. We get young people graduating with $50,000, $100,000, $200,000 in debt, and we have to ease that burden. President Biden's talked about, on the campaign, he talked about $10,000 of debt relief. I think that would be a step in the right direction, and I've been very clear that I would support that if he did that.
Okay, so can I follow up on that?
What?
No, because
Okay.
doctors go to school, they take on $500,000 worth of debt. It's grand that they make a couple $100,000, but they can't pay it off.
So I have legislation on this. I hear you. So we've introduced legislation. I don't know how, but somehow I've ended up being the champion of graduate medical education, creating more opportunities for residencies, giving opportunities for doctors to graduate with less debt, and those that do have debt to go into professions. My nephew is a orthopedic surgeon. He's doing just fine. But people who are internal medicine, a pediatrician, pediatricians will never get out of the debt they acquire to become a pediatrician. And I would argue that's one of our most important doctors, is giving our kids a healthy start and keeping them healthy through the early years of their life. So creating opportunities to earn off that debt, and not just for doctors, but others. And it's doctors, it's dentists, it's physical therapists. Yeah, it's the whole healthcare. So we have that as a priority. So yeah. Okay, we will follow up. We'll follow up. Okay.
Okay, one thing, Frontline is running a four-part thing about the oil industry. It's very fascinating what has gone on in the oil industry since like day one, how they have manipulated the prices, things like that. My question is, however, you talk about voting, and my argument is, who's to vote for? I mean, you obviously, but when you read what goes on in the selection of candidates to run, it's governed by the higher-ups of the Democratic and Republican Party. It's controlled by the state legislators and not, any state where it doesn't matter who the party is, it's still run, where they'll draw the lines such that the incumbents have the shoe-in of being reelected. And when you go to the ballot box and you see, oh, well, I know this guy's going to get, where the primaries are actually the election, not the actual election, because, like I'm from where I'm from, it's a Republican area. So we know that any Republican we're voting for the elected official at the primary, not at the general election. So that's kind of like why vote, because of how it's all manipulated by politicians and the political parties into who's going to get to run, who's not. I mean, I've read in a paper where you have 3 or 4 people come up to the National Republican Party of the state of Illinois, and they say, oh yeah, we'll let you run and you run, but you can't run because you don't follow our whatever their platform. So that to me is what makes it difficult to
So this is a political question I'll answer. I'm happy to answer on. First thing I'll say that we walked in together and I said, if you ask me an easy question, I won't dish on the Sox. That was a really hard question, but I'll still say I'm hoping the Sox. I'm hoping the Sox turn around. I think one of the biggest problems we have in our nation is that people are turned off from voting, and they don't know who to vote for, and they can't get through the noise to find out who's a candidate. What do they know? The most important thing we do as citizens is vote, and that's true for president, Congress, governors, and mayors, but it's also true for our park district leaders and our school board leaders and everybody else. So we need more people to run. That's another story. It's now a dozen years since the Supreme Court ruled on something called Citizens United, and it basically lifted all the caps off on spending. So elections cost tens of millions of dollars. Way too much. So my election back in 2012, we were the 3rd most expensive election in the country. I raised $3 million, my opponent raised $4 million, then there was $8 million from outside groups that were spent in that race. The next election was 20, and the next election was 30. If you remember, I ran against the same guy 3 times. That's normal. I think we were the 3rd most expensive election in the country all 3 times, or something like that. We were one of the most expensive. That's just basic entry fees in many cases now. So it makes it hard for people, everyday people to run, and it makes it hard for everyday people to know what's true and what's not true about the candidate. So I really would like to see us find ways to get better at democratizing, small d, democratizing our elections so that we have more forums like this on the political side, where we do have those conversations, matching Republican and Democrat. My story about debates, I don't like debates because a debate, I've never seen a debate where anyone walked in not knowing who they were voting for, or anyone walked out having changed their mind. They become theater, right? What I would rather have is a forum, so one candidate comes and talks to you for 10 minutes, takes questions, 15 minutes from the audience, and the next candidate comes in and takes questions. Because that's a more, I would argue, a more constructive format than saying, my candidate has pink hair and purple eyes, and that's disqualifying to run. And that's what we get to. We've got to get back to civics classes, where our kids are learning these things in school to think for themselves, to know what's true. All this talk about social media is scary. People are personally attacked on social media. I've talked to constituents who tell just the most horrifying stories about the experiences their kids have, the bullying and everything else. But the bullying takes place in different ways at the adult level. One of the things I've always said, I raised my kids on this idea and I brought it to my politics. I'm confident enough in what I believe that I don't have to prove you wrong to hold on to my beliefs. But I'm not certain about anything enough to not listen to what you have to say and possibly learn and shift my position. And we need more people willing to do that. So if I could have a magic wand, what would I do to achieve what you wanted? Is I would give more access to the airways to the candidates and try to create more transparency when non-candidates are messaging what they're saying. As a candidate, you know I have to say, I'm Brad Schneider and I approve this message. It's coming from me. But there are people who can say things about me, negative or positive. I have no idea who they are. I have no idea why they're there. They could be Americans for popcorn, and they could say, you know, Brad Schneider wants to raise your taxes 500%. You don't know who they are, who's behind them. So we've tried to introduce legislation. One of the things that happens is Americans for popcorn, someone puts in $500 million on October 15th, and they have 30 days to disclose who they are. Well, the election's November 8th. They don't disclose until November 15th. We don't know. That should be immediately. If introduced legislation that any candidate who gets a check over, I think we said $1,000, has to report who gave them that check within 48 hours or 7 days. Right now, it's 90 days. So, you know, at this point, it doesn't matter. The elections, well, I guess there's a primary in June, so it does matter. So people are getting money. Well, who's backing these candidates and what's their agenda? I want to know the people I'm voting for. And you said something just in passing, but it's the thing that distresses me more than anything else. At some point, I just give up and it's not worth voting. That feeling is shared by a majority of the people.
Especially when there's only one candidate on the ballot.
Right. But it may be on the top, but as you go down for county boards, for town councils, for whatever the case might be, there's candidates in all those spots, and we need to make sure that their voices are getting heard, and we're electing people, you know. You guys run every 4 years.
Our terms are 4 years.
4 years. I would really like that. Every 4 years, they're going out and they're knocking doors, right? You guys haven't run TV commercials recently, right? It is going out and shaking hands and knocking doors. I mean, one of the issues, and I don't have an answer for this, I represent, in the next election, 750,000 people. I can't knock on all their doors. Right? So I try to get out as much as I can and meet as many people, do the parades and talk at schools and everything else, and I think I'm pretty accessible. But at the end of the day, I'm going to have to get on TV, and other people can get on TV. One solution would be to add, we haven't added members to the House. We're at 435 for over 100 years. The population has grown more than 3 times in that period. The closer we are to the people, I think the better. And go Sox.
One comment, when we complain about the gas prices, as bad as they are here, they're twice as much in Europe and have been all along, 2 to 3 times what we've been paying, which is why they drive small cars and we drive big ones. My question, though, to you is, has to do with this 20% minimum international tax on large corporations. I think 27 countries have signed on to that with multinational companies. What's the Democrats or Congress's take on this? Because I guess it's being held up somewhere here.
It's being held up in the Senate thing. I'm getting the signal that we're getting near the hour. So it's not 20%. The 2017 tax bill had something called GILTI, and that was 10.5%. President Biden's proposal was to increase that to 21%, to double it. At the same time, Secretary Yellen was working with the international community and got consensus to a minimum tax internationally of 15%. I actually led an effort to say, I think we're worth more than the world, but not 40% more. That the gap between 15 and 21 on multinationals would is a big enough incentive that companies would make the decision to relocate outside the U.S. We want them to come here. So, you know, the bill that passed the Ways and Means Committee that I helped with put our number at 16.5% relative to 15. And I think that's clearly within a range. We have a better education system, we have infrastructure that needs work, but we've got rule of law. There's reasons so many companies start here, succeed here, and grow from here. And that's where we were. What actually ultimately passed in what we thought was the compromise Build Back Better bill was 15%, so the global level. That died in the Senate. So the holdup is the legislative process of Congress, and I'm going to point a finger, and I'm going to point my whole hand because I don't want any fingers pointing back at me. It's the Senate. And maybe a couple senators, but it's more than a couple because we need to, I do think these things should be bipartisan. We need a international tax system that levels the playing field. As long as the playing field's level, American companies can compete. If there's a race to the bottom, then it's not good for the U.S., it's not good for the rest of the world. You know, you rush down to zero, then the things I talked about that allow our companies to succeed, our education system, our roads, our rule of law, starts to get nibbled away out. So that's the holdup. So I think I have time for one more question, and then we'll wrap it up.
We're teachers.
Thank you.
In fact, his wife is Ukrainian, teaching in Lincolnwood. And my question is that as teachers, we teach up in Waukegan, a Title III school, and there's so much that teachers are facing. I can sit here all day and talk. But one thing is that as teachers, we're always going back to school. We just finished a master's program. I think he's got 4, I got 2 masters. And all of this costs a ton of money. And, you know, we're going to school to make maybe an extra $1,000 a year is what they give us for, you know, getting advanced degrees. There's got to be some help because as we go and get multiple advanced degrees, it's beneficial to our students. He's dual language, my wife is dual language, his wife's an art teacher, I'm a self-contained ESL instructor. I'm getting advanced degrees as a math teacher, as a language arts teacher. All of these degrees help us with our practice as far as educating our students. However, the burden of paying back student loans, and we get minimal reimbursement from our district. A master's degree can cost $21,000 to us. We might get $1,500, $1,400 a year from our district. We need some relief.
Thank you. Let me ask what's going to seem like an unrelated question, but I'm going to tie it back. How much did you spend last year on just buying basic supplies for your classroom?
I probably spend somewhere between $1,000 and $2,000 a year.
Out of your own pocket?
Out of my pocket, and I get $200 back on my taxes.
So I start with that because we're in a situation where teachers are forced to spend their own money just to have the basic supplies in the classroom. And the supplies are an enabling factor of a classroom. The most powerful factor in the classroom is the capabilities of that teacher. And I'm trying to think if this fits. This may not be the best analogy, but my dad tells a story. He had a client who said, I don't want to spend money training my employees because I'm worried they'll leave. And he said to them, wouldn't you be more worried that you don't spend money training them and they stay? And so we've got to spend on our kids because our kids are our future. If we're going to make those chips in the United States and lead in the future, if we're going to invent or discover the next breakthrough, whether it's a vaccine or a cure, we need to train those kids. Go see this Ravinia music box. It's really extraordinary. But if we're going to create the kids that have the ingenuity and creativity to come up with this concept, and when you see, you'll understand what I'm talking about, we need to educate our kids. And if we're going to educate our kids, that means investing in the teachers. So I don't have a direct answer. Well, we can talk more, is because I think there are ways that we can help. You know, most spending on education is happening at the local level, as it should. I do believe education should be a local issue with national aspirations. Federal spending is, overall, I think it's only about 2% of the total we spend on education. we can create ways to try to find more opportunities. I said when I started this, when I retire, I want education to be what's on the back of my jersey, because that is what this is about. And
The Great Lakes on the back of your shirt.
Great Lakes is on the back of my car. I already have that bumper sticker. So thank you. Well, thank you guys. This has been a great conversation. I really appreciate you coming out. The karma from this conversation, it's not raining, and it was supposed to be storming. I hope it stays that way today. But I wish everyone a wonderful weekend, a good rest of the spring, and I'm praying for both the Sox and the Cubs. Sorry.